So I'll take you back to the year 2013. I've been here for about 4.5 years, and I moved here from Michigan. And for those of you that are familiar with some of the roads in Michigan, they're very, very challenging. But more importantly, some of the congestion, especially up and down the interstates, are terrible. And so I would drive every day from Clarkston, Michigan to downtown Detroit, up and down Interstate 75, and I lost the equivalent of several years of my life because of the challenges up and down that road. Greenville came along in 2013, beautiful place, great people, a wonderful job, great climate. And I'll never forget though, in 2013, I met an official at one of the BMW golfing events that we sponsored. And we did all the pleasantries, and then I just came out with it and said, how in the hell did Woodruff Road get to this point? I mean, I just had to ask that question. And then also the second part to that was, who owns this problem? And the answer to that question was telling. It was basically, it's not my problem. And so what I hope to get out of this today is, as Dean said earlier, is the kickoff of an event and a process in which we all own this problem. Mobility, for me, is a personal issue. And whether you look at it that way or not, it is a personal issue for you. Congestion continues to grow in the Upstate. You see that, I see that in just the last 4.5 years. And it's not somebody else's problem to fix. We all own this problem, and we're only going to help things if we all jump into this together. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak today about some of the technology trends. Some of these will be discussed in greater depth in the breakout sessions. There's a lot in the air today, so to speak, about what's going on in mobility. And I think, one of the themes you'll hear from today is that there is no silver bullet to fix these problems. So I love showing this chart because this is an indication of what has transpired and what the industry, the mobility industry, is focused on in the time ahead. A lot of maturing powertrain technologies, especially in the electric vehicle area, which I'll talk more about here in a minute. Also in lightweighting and materials, rapid advances into connected vehicles that we'll hear more about. A big shift in mobility preferences. How many of you have used Uber today in the audience? Maybe half, maybe a little over a third. Anybody use Lyft? Okay, so that is a big change that's happening in mobility. And then also the emergence of autonomous vehicles. But the way I'd like to talk about this today is by looking at what we call ACEs, automated, connected, electric, and shared mobility. The point of this is just to say that there are existing and new mobility paradigms that will use combination of these technologies. No one technology separately will we see employed in the time ahead. These trends don't exist alone, but in combination. And I'll talk to some of these as I go forward here. Why autonomous vehicles? Let's start with this topic. You see a lot of this in the news today, right? Just about every day you see something new that is happening in driverless vehicles. There are a number of reasons that I've shown here on this chart why autonomous vehicles are important, mainly for purposes related to safety. There are a lot of fatalities on the roads here today, and it's hoped that autonomous vehicles will alleviate many of those fatalities by taking the human out of the equation, ultimately, but I think more importantly today, it's not so much the advent of these fully self-driving vehicles, but it's what's happening in today's vehicles to make them safer. Advanced driving assist systems with lane departure warning, and as well as braking assist systems are already happening in today's vehicles. You see this in multiple OEMs products today. However, when looking at fully autonomous self-driving vehicles, especially when using transportation as more of a service, not as a vehicle that we would own, our lives change dramatically, and so do our cities. I noted here yesterday that there were a couple of news articles, one in the Wall Street Journal, that alluded to the fact that autonomous vehicles are expected to increase urban sprawl. And I think if you only look at autonomous vehicles from the standpoint of putting more vehicles on the road, that is certainly possible. But also, it was announced yesterday that GM will be putting driverless vehicles on the roads in New York City next year. So this is really happening. This is not a pipe dream. Not only does automation apply to the vehicles that we have today, or our personal use vehicles, but they're increasingly popular in the transportation of goods. You wouldn't think that necessarily, because we don't see a lot of that, but especially in the heavy-duty tractor-trailer, over-the-road truck business, the opportunity for platooning of vehicles for improving fuel efficiency, as well as solving a critical issue in the trucking industry, which is availability of drivers, leads to numerous companies working on driverless heavy-duty trucks, including Elon Musk, for example. So you may have seen in the last few weeks some of our own local headlines. So we are involved in self-driving vehicles. If you go downstairs here today, you'll see this vehicle that's shown in the picture. I think it's important that we encourage all of us to develop these autonomous vehicle districts. That's what we're doing out at ICU-ICAR. And so we're aggressively not just looking at a multitude of mobility solutions, but also getting practical experience with these vehicles on our campus. Well, I hope this works. We'll see. Maybe not. Okay. So we will employ this vehicle, what's called a level 4 autonomous vehicle at ICAR. For those of you that are familiar with our campus, I've shown there in yellow the route. This is not just something that is a cool thing to do for us, but we have a practical need for moving people from the CU-ICAR campus over to the Greenville Technical College Center for Manufacturing Innovation. We can't walk through the woods. That's a perilous thing to do. I've tried it. I would not suggest it to anybody. But we have this need to move people back and forth, and ultimately what we see doing is extending the route for this vehicle to go beyond or up and down Millennium, past Fisher Middle School, Hubble Lighting, TD Bank, and yes, all the way to Woodruff Road. So it's an exciting time for all of us to get experience with this. And I do want to point out that we have representatives from robotic research here today who were responsible for the development of this vehicle. This vehicle is amazing. It was in operation at Fort Bragg for a couple of years before it came here. It transported wounded warriors from their barracks to hospitals on this sprawling campus for a period of time, and we're very fortunate to have them here in Greenville as a partner of ours. I actually showed this chart a few months ago to the mayors in South Carolina. Some of you may be familiar with Jeff Speck. He's a very respected author and urban planner who offers 10 principles cities should live by when considering autonomous vehicles. I appreciate his perspective because there's so much hype out there today on AVs as the panacea for solving all problems, but they are not that. And if they're only viewed from the perspective of the next evolution of the automobile, as I said earlier, they will contribute to urban sprawl. He says, be afraid, technology always wins. I like that perspective because in reality, many of these technologies will find a niche to work their way into, and that's always the case. Be realistic, know what you expect from autonomous vehicles, decide how much traffic you want, plan for sprawl pressure. I love that statement. All of us will get we already have a sense for that right now with the growth of our region. Understand transit geometry. That's the issue on Woodruff Road. There's low occupancy vehicles on that road all the time. One driver in the vehicle. The only solution for Woodruff Road is to get people out of cars. And so, again, there are a myriad of mobility solutions here. And you probably can't read this in the middle of the slide here. So why do we all ask how we can make cars better? I love that. I'm a car person. I've been doing this for 37 years. Where has that gotten us? The right question is how we can provide the most useful mobility to the most people with the most positive outcomes for society. The answer includes cars, buses, trains, biking, and walking, especially biking and walking. So all of those should be in play here as we go forward. Here you go. As a powertrain person, I don't know that I'm too happy with this picture as it shows the death of the internal combustion engine. This was actually in The Economist here in the past couple of months. So do we expect to see that happen in our lifetimes? I don't think so, but because they've been calling for this for a long time. But it does bring up the fact that there will be an increasing number of electric vehicles on the roads in the time ahead. There are going to be more models of electric vehicles come out in the next probably 18 months than we've seen over many, many years. And you say, well, why is that? I mean, fuel prices are $2 a gallon. Why would I ever want to own an electric vehicle? Well, for the first time in history, they are becoming competitive in terms of price and in terms of range between charges of the vehicle. I showed this chart in India back in January because this was what we need to keep our eyes on here for this year and next year. The Chevy Bolt, priced at about $37,000, 238 miles range versus the Model 3, the Tesla Model 3, which has just come out. Again, pretty much in that same price range and range between charges of the vehicle. And this is a famous chart that shows the bars represent how the cost of batteries over the last few years have gone down by 73% from 2008 to 2015. Expected to reach a target, you can see in the 2020-2022 timeframe, which brings them to cost parity with today's internal combustion engine vehicle. We've never been there with electric vehicles, so that's why EVs will become more popular, and then the curve itself shows the battery energy density continuing to increase, which simply means that over the next few years we expect to get about 300 miles between charges, which is about what you have for today's vehicle for refueling. So it's an exciting time for EVs. Speaking of which, I'll put a little plug in here for Proterra, because Proterra has done a great job, a local company and one of the largest producers of electric vehicles in the U.S. in the transit community. This is a game changer because this is transportation as a service. We need to use more transit. Dean showed the chart earlier, how many people use transit buses in the Upstate. We have a clean transit solution in the Upstate, in Proterra. The Catalyst vehicle here will get up to 350 miles on a single charge. And they're making significant inroads all across the U.S., including here in Greenville, because Greenville, right, Eric, will be deploying 2 buses in the city, hopefully over the next year or 2. So we're very excited to have them here. This is something I pulled in here because I find this very interesting as we start to look at mobility or transportation as a service. Let me just read this to you. We are on the cusp of one of the fastest, deepest, most consequential disruptions of transportation in history. By 2030, within 10 years of regulatory approval of autonomous vehicles, 95% of U.S. passenger miles traveled will be served by on-demand autonomous electric vehicles owned by fleets, not individuals. By 2030, individually owned internal combustion engine vehicles will still represent 40% of the vehicles in the U.S. vehicle fleet, but they will provide just 5% of passenger miles. So imagine that. You're going to have a vehicle. You see this today. This is the big disruption that will happen in a more shared community in which you will travel to work, you will travel to other places in a vehicle that was shared with other people. So no longer will you have a vehicle that you own necessarily or exclusively as your means to get to work or wherever you need to go, but you're going to have another option at your fingertips, and that other option means that that vehicle will be used a whole lot more than you use your vehicle today. Your vehicle today spends 96% of its life doing nothing. And that will change, and that will change because of the economics that's shown here as well. The average American will save more than $5,600 per year in transportation costs, equivalent to a wage raise of 10%. So imagine that revolution. I can tell you today that this is keeping automotive executives awake at night, because if this happens, then the whole model for selling vehicles, for you and I buying vehicles at the kind of volumes we're talking about, changes drastically. That is the biggest disruption that's being projected over the next 10 to 20 years to occur. So, emerging autonomous, connected, electric vehicles. Imagine a vehicle like this. This is a Locomotors Ollie vehicle for certain parts of the community that could provide a mobility service and access to people that don't have access to transportation today. Imagine a vehicle that would pick you up close to your home and would transport you to a regular transit bus stop and vice versa. This is a true ACES solution that combines everything that I just talked about here today, and you might even see them here in the Upstate in the near future. I sure hope so. Or to take that a step further, what if we want to elevate in order to alleviate on-road congestion? Imagine a time where we all buy into the fact that we can't pave our way to prosperity. That's the mode that we're in right now. We can't make roads wider. We can't continue to put money into road improvements. We must find other solutions. Other cities are doing this. We don't have to invent it here. And solutions such as this gives people an opportunity to travel in 5-passenger pods on demand from site to site across the Upstate. And I can tell you this is not as it was 30 years ago. These are lightweight solutions with the advent of software that gives technology like this the capability to have on-demand service. It's not like it was 30 years ago. Coming from Detroit, we have the People Mover. Some of you may be familiar with that in downtown Detroit. This is not a people mover. This is not what exists at Disney World. This is new, it is different, and it may be a significant way forward for the Upstate. So in summary, I think automated, connected electric, and shared technology will become a bigger part of our future. It must be so. These technologies will take the form of traditional transportation and non-traditional modes of transportation. You'll hear that as a theme throughout the rest of the day. And I think consideration must be given to these multiple mode options when seeking to solve our local transportation problems. View transportation as a service. Viewing transportation as a service is a vital ingredient in our growing economy. Thank you very much.